What if there's an incident that there's no physical touching or actual physical injury? Can I still recover for something known as emotional distress, and why?
My name is Eric Mausner. This is Tom Graham. We're personal injury lawyers at our law firm called Mausner Graham Injury Law in Miami, Florida. On this channel, we talk about various issues and matters related to personal injury cases.
So what is emotional distress, Eric?
So emotional distress is a type of non-economic damages in a personal injury case. It's also known as mental anguish. It's where a victim, an injury victim, can recover for harm suffered mentally. And that can include PTSD or trauma related to the incident. It can include anxiety, depression, and other symptoms related to the mind.
So those psychological things.
Exactly.
Can you give us some examples or maybe a case that sticks out in your mind involving emotional distress?
Emotional damages in Florida have limitation. You do need to experience some type of physical impact, even if you don't have substantial physical injuries. And then, of course, there's the exception where, if you watch a loved one unfortunately pass away or suffer some serious injury, you could recover for emotional harm or trauma that you're experiencing from watching that loved one go through something awful. I had a case where a gentleman was sitting in his living room watching TV and a bullet whizzed past his head. Crazy case. This bullet shot past his head, shattered glass right next to him, and the glass cut his face. So you had a situation where it was a near-death experience, and he also suffered physical harm. So we satisfied the requirements of the rule. Even though it was minor, it was a cut to his face, a little laceration, it was enough to satisfy the rule. And then, of course, a bullet whizzing past your head speaks for itself. It's a horrible situation. It's a near-death experience, and he suffered trauma as a result.
Interesting.
But here, what was interesting about this case was it wasn't just a stray bullet. His next-door neighbor was in the military cleaning his gun. He left a bullet in the chamber, and it discharged.
Wow.
Bullet shot out his house. I think there was an open door, open window. The bullet went out and into the neighboring house where our client was sitting and almost killed him. So we were able to recover money against the gun owner's homeowner's insurance in that case. But that was only after the client did a lot of mental health treatment. So what is mental health treatment in these cases? Therapy, psychological treatment with a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So someone has to go through a course of treatment and document their head symptoms, their psychological damage, the trauma. Our client in that case was diagnosed with PTSD at the end of a 6-month treatment program. And he had nightmares from this near-death experience, as you can imagine. So that was an example of a case that we had where someone didn't really suffer significant physical injuries, but they were suffering mentally as a result of a near-death experience.
Very interesting. And unique how every person can kind of react differently to situation.
So is physical impact required in Florida to bring a case or bring damages for emotional harm? And yes, you need to experience some kind of physical impact, with the exception of if you witness a loved one experience a personal injury case and suffer serious harm. Otherwise, you do need to have some kind of impact. You need to be close to the incident. You can't just be claiming emotional harm for an awful thing that you saw, across the street unrelated to you. So can you recover for emotional harm in car accidents? And the answer is yes, you can. You do need to go through a mental health treatment, though. You can't just expect to recover damages by from being in the car accident alone. You're going to need to see a therapist or a psychologist and go through a course of treatment and document all your symptoms.
So I have an example of a case involving what could be considered purely emotional distress. And it's a really horrible set of facts. But this family, they were going on a cruise vacation, and their father, the husband and father of this lovely family, he started to get sick at dinner, and he got a little bit sick, so he went back to his cabin, and he was sweating and had pain in his arm, and he was suffering from some stomach issues. So his wife comes back and they say, you need to go to the ship medical center, right? You need to get some help. And he gets there, the ship is in port at this time, and the doctor sort of says, you're having a heart attack, but we're leaving. We can't get you off the ship. You have to stay on. And the family just freaks out, right? Because obviously he's having a heart attack. He needs to get off and get to a higher level of care. And the ship doesn't do that. They keep going, basically to make sure there's no operational disruption. And as a result, this man continues to get worse and worse and worse. And the family is right there in the close quarters of this small ship infirmary, watching their husband die as these horrible things unfold before their eyes. Now, they weren't actually touched, right? They weren't in a car accident. There's no physical injury to them. But what happened to them was so awful and so outrageous and even intentional that we were able to successfully bring a claim called intentional infliction of emotional distress. And I think that's an example of what you were mentioning earlier, witnessing something horrible happening to a loved one. Now, this occurred under maritime law, but it's an example of purely emotional injury that was ultimately compensable and otherwise might have been more challenging in the maritime context for a lot of reasons.
Did you bring a claim for intentional, or was it negligent infliction of emotional distress?
So, good question. Because this was ultimately a wrongful death case, because he died, there's a law on the sea called the Death on the High Seas Act, which, as you know, really limits those types of damages. So, for instance, in Death on the High Seas, you cannot get any type of psychological injury or emotional distress for the death of a loved one. You can only get economic damages, very small. Because of the operation of that law being so harsh and the absolutely atrocious and outrageous conduct at play here, we did wrongful death and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And because we were successful in the IIED, intentional infliction of emotional distress, we were able to open up and get additional damages beyond just economic pecuniary damages because it was such a horrible and outrageous situation.
Interesting. That's obviously a more rare situation, would you think?
Super rare, had to thread a needle, and it was very factually specific to an intense and horrible set of facts that society just won't condone. I think another question we often get is, what if someone has a pre-existing condition, right? And under the law, we talk about an eggshell plaintiff. So if you punch a guy in the face and he's a really big, strong guy and nothing happens, maybe you won't be liable for that much damages. But if you punch a little old lady in the face and she's feeble and you end up knocking her out or, God forbid, killing her, you're on the hook for all of that. So how the person comes into a situation, you're going to be responsible for the outcome of your conduct. And that is also true for psychological or emotional injuries. If someone is very susceptible or going through something and you make it worse, you should be on the hook for that.
Yeah, I agree. And you're gonna need to be with the right doctors to separate out your old and your new injuries as well. So it's important, and it's also important if you're watching, for those watching this video, you always want to be honest with your personal injury lawyer, because the law allows for the aggravation or the activation of these pre-existing injuries. So if you had it previously and it got worse after the accident, we need to know about it so we can help build your case around that. And the jury instructions in Florida are really there to protect you for this. So if you had back issues prior or mental health issues and now it became worse, we need to know about it. So in order to make a claim for emotional distress or mental anguish or even physical injuries, you do need to be making a claim against a party with insurance. So if that's another driver, or if it's a business, or any kind of business or a corporation, you need to be making a claim against insurance, and that's the case for any personal injury claim. So what's the insurance company or a defense attorney going to ask when it comes to emotional distress? What kind of evidence are they require? And they're going to require therapy and psychology records. So you're going to need to prove the psychological harm you suffered as a direct result of the incident. And if you don't have those records to back it up, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to have a viable claim. It's going to get defended or defeated pretty easily. So you need to be with a treater, I would say, on a weekly to monthly plan for a significant amount of time to prove that you are suffering the psychological harm.
Well, thank you for listening today. I'm Tom Graham here with my law partner, Eric Mausner. We're Mausner Graham, and on this channel, we talk about all things personal injury. So if this was a good conversation for you, please feel free to leave us a comment or get in touch with us. We love this stuff, and we're always happy to help and always happy to talk about it.